Hi, I'm Gordon from Camera Labs, and this video is all about my newfound love of the mid-40s focal length, roughly disguised as a review of the Sigma 45mm f2.8 DG-DN prime lens. So whether you're interested in this lens specifically, or just want to find out why this has become my favourite focal length, stick around and I'll tell you all about it. I'm going to start with loads of sample images taken with the Sigma 45 on a Panasonic Lumix S1R2 body, so it also serves to illustrate how this combination performs. And if you're interested in the S1R2, I've got a separate review all about it. Absolutely all of the images here, bar one, are JPEGs straight out of camera with no modifications. As for that one converted RAW file, it shouldn't be too much of a challenge to spot it, but do let me know. Meanwhile, if you just want to skip forward to my tests with the Sigma 45, use the chapter marks below. So why all the fuss about the 45 focal length? After all, it's very close to that most vanilla of lenses, the good old 50, and in most cases you're going to be able to find cheaper and brighter 50s available. Thing is, a focal length in the mid-40s is actually closer to our view of the world than a 50, and when testing the Leica Q343, I was surprised how much of a difference it made in practice. Technically, an early to mid-40s lens will deliver coverage that's roughly between a 35 and a 50, so wider than a so-called standard 50 but avoiding the distortion of a wider 35. It shouldn't really need more explanation than this, but beyond these numbers, it just feels more natural to me, better reflecting and reproducing what I'm actually seeing with my eyes. As photographers, we're always visualising how a scene or subject would look with different focal lengths, effectively zooming with our imaginations before even bringing a camera to our eyes. But with a lens in the 40s, the view already looks pretty much as you see it in person. A photographer friend of mine nailed it when he described using a 40 as capturing what you see. You spot something interesting, raise the camera to your eye, and record exactly that, not wider or tighter. It's not an interpretation or modification, it's simply close to reality as you saw it. When shooting with a mid-40s lens, I also enjoy framing square onto the subject, adjusting my height rather than angling it up or down where possible, and trying my hardest to keep the horizon level and any geometry straight. I guess I'm trying to channel my inner Stanley Kubrick. And have you spotted the process RAW file yet? Yep, I was lucky to enjoy a glimpse of the Northern Lights while on a flight from Japan passing over the Bering Strait. I managed to mostly shield the lens from the cabin reflections, but the aurora was still very faint on the image, so here I've unashamedly boosted the exposure on the RAW file and applied plenty of Photoshop's latest AI noise reduction to clean up what had become a very noisy image. But it is another sample taken with the 45mm on the S1R Mark II. Right, that's enough of the self-indulgent talk of natural looking coverage and time for some technical tests with the Sigma 45 2.8 DG-DN, as amazingly I never actually reviewed this lens when it first came out. Originally launched in 2019 and currently costing around $500 or pounds, the 45 2.8 DG-DN was actually one of the first of Sigma's contemporary I series, subsequently joined by a selection of wider and longer options. In Sigma's lineup, DG-DN means it's designed for full-frame, mirrorless bodies. The 45 is available in Sony E or Leica L mounts, the latter now also available in a rather smart-looking silver finish to match the new Sigma BF camera. I do hope Sigma will also offer the E-mount version in silver, as I'm sure plenty of Sony owners would also be interested. That said, Sigma does offer a lens mount conversion service for this lens, so you could always buy the silver L mount version and have it converted to Sony E-mount for an additional fee if you were really keen. I tested the black L-mount version on a Lumix S1R2 body. It's the smallest in Sigma's I series, measuring 64mm in diameter and 46mm in length and weighing just 215 grams. This makes it the most compact L-mount lens with autofocus at the time I made this review, so it's also a perfect partner for the Lumix S9. The all-metal body feels great in your hands and it's weatherproofed at the mount. Like all of Sigma's lenses and cameras, it's made in their Aizu factory in Japan. Closest to the mount is a switch for manual or autofocus, followed by a clicky aperture ring running between 2.8 and 22 with A for body-based control. Note there's no lock for the A position nor an option to declick the aperture ring. Towards the end of the barrel is a narrow, free-spinning manual focusing ring, and finally a 55mm filter thread. Sigma also supplies a metal cylindrical lens hood which continues the ribbed design, and I think it looks really good. How about you? Just for comparison, here's Sigma's 45 2.8 DGTN. Now switch for the Lumix S 51.8, a prime lens for L-mount bodies that's a little tighter in coverage and just over a stop brighter. It's larger at 74mm in diameter and 82mm in length, a little heavier at 300 grams, but it costs roughly the same, around $450 or pounds, so it is a key rival for the Sigma lens and discounts are often available. So let's compare their quality. Let's start with coverage, alternating between the Sigma 45 and the Lumix 50 to illustrate the slightly wider field of view of the Sigma. They're obviously pretty close here, but as mentioned earlier, I personally prefer the 45 for general use, and it's surprising how much more flexible the coverage feels in practice. Right, now let's angle that view so that details run into the corners to measure the performance on a distant real-life subject. You're looking at the Sigma 45mm here, wide open to 2.8, and taking a closer look in the centre of the image shows details to be nice and sharp right out of the gate. Stopping it down to f4 brings small improvements to the contrast. Now let's return to the 2.8 sample, and on the right introduce the Lumix S 50mm, wide open at 1.8. Obviously the view is a bit tighter due to the slightly longer focal length. I'd say the Sigma is looking a little crisper here, but equally it's over a stop dimmer at this point. So let's now close the Lumix 50 on the right to a matching aperture of f2.8. Now they're looking closer on details, and again, closing down one stop further to f4 brings some contrast benefits to both. Now back to the Sigma 45 at 2.8 before heading into the far corner, where you're going to notice a little softening on the finest details, albeit not too bad. Closing the aperture to f4 sharpens up the far corner nicely here. Now let's return to the Sigma at 2.8 before moving it over to the left hand side and adding the Lumix S 50mm on the right, here wide open at 1.8. Note the slightly different focal length means again you're looking at slightly different crops here, but both are representing the same far corner portions of their respective images. Here you can see the Lumix 50 on the right looking noticeably softer with some colour aberrations too, but again it is over a stop brighter than the Sigma at this point, so let's now close it to f2.8 for a match. This greatly improves the corner definition, but it remains behind the Sigma on the left when they're both at the same aperture. Now for both lenses close to f4, where both enjoy improvements, but again the Sigma enjoys a lead. The Lumix continues to improve as you stop it down, but by around f11 diffraction is beginning to kick in with a softening of the overall image, so it never actually manages to catch up with the Sigma's corner performance in this distant subject test. How about potential for shallow depth of field effects at a portrait distance though? I've switched to video for this next comparison, starting with the Sigma 45 at 2.8 of course, and as expected for the focal length and aperture and subject distance, there's not a huge opportunity for blurring in the background, at least on portraits like this. There is some separation, but not much. So now let's switch to the Lumix S50 at 1.8, where the benefit of the brighter aperture, not to mention the slightly longer focal length, are clear. There's way more blurring possible in the background here, even when I'm a little further away to match the subject size on the frame. Placing them side by side cements this difference, and while the rendering on the Sigma is pretty well behaved, the background on the Lumix on the right is simply way more blurred, and if that's what you're looking for, a 51.8 could serve you very well, but it's not the end of the story. Just before moving on, you may also notice a colour difference between the clips filmed moments apart, with the Lumix lens looking warmer. If you prefer this look, you may want to adjust the white balance when using the Sigma. And finally my bokeh ball test from close range, which you would assume would be an easy win for the brighter Lumix lens, but hang on just a minute there. Let's start with the Sigma 45, open to 2.8, from its closest focusing distance of 24cm. There's nice large bokeh blobs here which manage to avoid outlining and minimise the onion ringing textures within. As I close the aperture to f4, the blobs shrink of course, but they do become more uniformly rounded and stay mostly circular. At f5.6 though, most of the blobs have taken on the more geometric shape of the 7-bladed diaphragm system. You may or may not like this effect. Now let's put the Sigma 45 on the left at 2.8 and compare it to the Lumix 50 at 1.8 on the right, both from their closest focusing distances. And unfortunately for the Lumix lens, it cannot focus closer than 45cm away. That's almost double the distance of the Sigma, and it means that both the subject and the blobs behind it have become smaller, even with its larger aperture. Close the Lumix lens to f2.8 and you can see the even bigger difference when both apertures are matched. You may also begin to notice the shape of the 9-bladed diaphragm system on the Lumix lens as its apertures close down. So in this test, the Sigma makes up for its dimmer aperture by being able to focus much closer. Obviously, if the subjects are at the same distance though, the Lumix is going to deliver greater background blur when both are set to their maximum apertures, and you saw that on the earlier portrait test, or indeed for any subject down to 45cm. But if you can exploit the closer focusing of the Sigma lens, you can enjoy potentially bigger bokeh blobs. That said, I did notice the Sigma 45 becoming a bit softer when shooting at its closest distances, at least when the aperture is wide open, so do bear that in mind if you're into macro style photography. Now it's time for my final verdict. The Sigma 45 2.8 DGDN is a great option for anyone wanting a standard prime lens with a natural field of view and compact barrel. The coverage better matches what you actually see with your eyes than a 50, and while the 2.8 aperture won't deliver as much background blur as say a 51.8, you can maximise the potential with the 24cm closest focusing distance. As a member of Sigma's contemporary I series, the 45 enjoys all-metal construction with ribbed rings and a smart-looking matching hood. It looks great and it feels great in your hands too, certainly a step up from a budget 50. It's also satisfyingly compact, indeed the smallest L-mount lens with autofocus at the time I made this video, which also makes it ideal for those wanting a small combination say for travel, street or everyday use. Like other I series lenses, the aperture ring isn't declickable and the weather sealing is only at the mount. Plus in my test the 45 DGDN did become a little softer at the closest focusing distances, but it was sharper out into the corners than a budget 50 at longer distances, and I personally prefer the coverage and the perspective of this focal length. Ultimately, the Sigma 45 2.8 DGDN has become one of my favourite general purpose lenses, and if I had to choose just one lens for an L-mount system, this would be it. Meanwhile, Sony owners also have the option of the 40mm 2.5G for a similar price, and I've got a review of that lens if you'd like to weigh them both up. I hope you enjoyed this review, and as always, if you want me to make more of them, please do consider liking this video and giving my channel a follow. It really does all help. So let me know what you think of the mid-40s focal lengths in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.